March 19, 2003. Washington, D.C. President George W. Bush addresses the nation. His words are measured, confident, absolute. Iraq possesses weapons of mass destruction. The threat is imminent. The evidence is clear, except it wasn't. No WMDs were ever found, not one. What followed was a war that killed over 500,000 people, cost $3 trillion, destabilized an entire region, and created ISIS. All built on a lie, or at the very least, a catastrophic failure to tell the truth. But here's the uncomfortable part. That same week, you lied too. Probably multiple times. Maybe you told your boss you were almost done with that project when you hadn't started. Maybe you told your friend you loved their new haircut when you absolutely did not. Maybe you told yourself you'd start that diet on Monday. We are all liars. Every single one of us. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean it as a biological fact. Today, we're diving into the neuroscience, psychology, history, and catastrophic consequences of lying. We're going to explore why your brain is hardwired to deceive, when lying first emerged in human evolution, the different types of lies we tell, and the moments in history when lies didn't just hurt feelings, they ended civilizations. By the end of this, you'll realize something disturbing. You're not as honest as you think you are. None of us are. Footage of Bush speech, war imagery, then transition to everyday mundane moments of people clearly lying in social situations. Let's start with a question that sounds simple, but is actually deeply weird. What even is a lie? You might say, it's when you say something that isn't true, but that's not quite right. If I tell you the earth is flat, I'm not lying. I'm just wrong. A lie requires something more. Intent. You have to know something is false and choose to present it as true anyway. That's the difference between being mistaken and being a liar. But even that definition gets complicated. What about lies of omission? When you deliberately don't mention something important? What about exaggerations that technically contain truth but distort reality? What about telling someone what they want to hear to avoid hurting them? Psychologists have spent decades trying to categorize lies, and they've come up with a whole taxonomy of deception. There are pro-social lies, lies told to benefit others. There are self-serving lies, lies told to benefit yourself. There are white lies, little fibs we tell to smooth social interactions. And then there are the big ones: fraud, perjury, propaganda, the lies that topple governments and end lives. Let's break these down, because understanding the types of lies we tell reveals something profound about human nature. The most common lie you tell isn't to other people, it's to yourself. Psychologist Dan Ariely at Duke University has spent his career studying dishonesty, and his research reveals something fascinating. We're not rational calculators weighing the costs and benefits of lying. We're rationalizing machines, constantly rewriting our own narratives to maintain our self-image as good people. In one of Ariely's famous experiments, he gave participants a simple math test with an opportunity to cheat. The setup was genius. Solve 20 simple problems in 5 minutes, then shred your answer sheet and self-report how many you got right. Each correct answer earned money. The catch? The shredder was rigged. It only shredded the edges, so researchers could verify the real scores afterward. The results? About 70% of people cheated. But here's the interesting part. They didn't cheat maximally. If you're going to lie about your score, why not claim you got all 20 correct? Instead, most people fudge their results by just a few problems, maybe claiming they got 14 right when they really got 10. Why? Because of what Ariely calls the fudge factor. We want to benefit from dishonesty, but we also want to maintain our self-concept as honest people. So we cheat just enough to gain an advantage, but not so much that we feel like bad people. Then we rationalize it. I probably would have gotten those right if I had more time. I was close on that one anyway. Everyone else is probably doing it too. This is self-deception in action. We lie to ourselves first, then we lie to others, and we genuinely believe our own lies. Production note: animation showing the brain literally rewriting its own memory like editing a document. But self-deception is just one category. Let's talk about prosocial lies. Lies we tell supposedly to help others. You see your friend's baby for the first time. It looks like a raw chicken wrapped in a blanket. What do you say? Oh my God, she's beautiful. Congratulations, you just told a prosocial lie. And according to developmental psychologist Kang Lee at the University of Toronto, you've been doing this since you were about 3 years old. That's when children develop what's called theory of mind, the ability to understand that other people have thoughts and feelings different from your own. And almost immediately, they start using that ability to deceive. Prosocial lies are the lubricant of society. I loved your presentation. Of course I remember you. No, you don't look tired at all. These lies prevent conflict, preserve relationships, and allow society to function without constant brutal honesty, tearing everything apart. But here's where it gets ethically murky. Research by psychologist Bella DePaulo at the University of California found that people tell an average of 1 to 2 lies per day. And the vast majority are these kind lies. We've convinced ourselves that lying to spare someone's feelings is noble, but is it? Philosopher Immanuel Kant didn't think so. He argued that lying is always wrong, even to spare feelings, because it violates human dignity and rational autonomy. If someone asks your opinion, they're entitled to your honest answer. Lying to them, even kindly, is treating them as less than a full person capable of handling truth. I'm not sure I agree with Kant on this. Telling your grandmother her casserole tastes like sadness seems unnecessarily cruel. But his point raises an important question. When does being kind become being dishonest? And who decides which lies are acceptable? Then, there are the lies we tell for ourselves, the self-serving lies. These are the lies that get us promotions, avoid punishments, win arguments, and make us look better than we are. These are the lies on resumes, the lies to police officers, the lies about why we're late, the lies about what we were really doing last Friday night. And we are really good at these. A 2002 study by psychologist Robert Feldman at the University of Massachusetts had participants engage in 10-minute conversations with strangers. Afterward, researchers asked them to review the conversation and identify any lies they'd told. The average? 3 lies in 10 minutes. And most participants were shocked when shown the recordings. They genuinely didn't remember lying. The lies had been so automatic, so integrated into normal social performance, that they barely registered as deception. This is what psychologists call impression management, and it's exhausting. We're constantly curating a version of ourselves for public consumption, editing out the unflattering parts, emphasizing the highlights. Social media has turned this into an art form. Every Instagram post is essentially a prosocial lie to ourselves and others about how great our lives are. But the really dangerous self-serving lies aren't the small ones. They're the lies that build on each other, creating what psychologists call a slippery slope of dishonesty. You tell a small lie at work. You get away with it. Your brain registers, lying worked. Next time, you tell a slightly bigger lie, then a bigger one. Each lie makes the next one easier because your brain's alarm system, the part that says this is wrong, gets quieter with repetition. This is how people who start by stealing office supplies end up embezzling millions. This is how scientists who fudge one data point end up fabricating entire studies. The process is so gradual that the person involved often doesn't realize they've crossed major ethical lines until they're already in prison. Okay, but why? Why are we built this way? To understand that, we need to talk about evolution. Specifically, we need to talk about a very smart psychologist named Paul Ekman and a very interesting experiment involving children and cookies. Ekman wanted to know when children develop the ability to lie convincingly. So he designed a test. He told children he was going to leave the room and they were not to peek at a toy behind them. Then he left. Of course, they all peeked. When he came back, he asked, "Did you peek?" At age 3, children would immediately confess. At age 4, they'd lie, but badly. They'd say no while their entire body language screamed guilt. But by age 6 or 7, they could lie smoothly, maintain eye contact. control their facial expressions. This isn't something we teach children. They learn it on their own because deception is an evolutionary advantage. Think about it from a survival perspective. Our early ancestors lived in complex social groups where reputation was everything. Being able to deceive, to hide your true intentions, to project confidence when scared, to manipulate others into sharing resources, could mean the difference between eating and starving, between mating and dying alone. But here's the evolutionary arms race. As humans got better at lying, we also got better at detecting lies. We evolved incredibly sophisticated systems for reading facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, all the unconscious signals that might reveal deception. This created a feedback loop. Better lie detection meant only the best liars reproduced successfully. Better lying meant even better detection evolved. Back and forth for thousands of generations. The result? We are simultaneously the best liars and the best lie detectors in the animal kingdom. We're locked in an eternal cognitive war with each other and with ourselves. But humans aren't the only species that lie. Not even close. Deception exists throughout nature. The orchid that mimics a female bee to trick males into pollinating it. The harmless king snake with coloring that mimics the deadly coral snake. The cuckoo bird that tricks other birds into raising its young. But those are genetic deceptions, hardwired instincts. They're not lying in the way we think about it because there's no conscious intent. Conscious, deliberate deception requires a complex brain, and we see it in our closest relatives, great apes. Primatologist Frans de Waal documented a fascinating example with chimpanzees. A low-ranking male chimp found food but didn't want to share with the dominant males. So he sat quietly, pretending he'd found nothing, until the dominant males left. Then he quickly retrieved his food. That's not instinct. That's theory of mind. That's understanding that others have knowledge separate from your own, and deliberately manipulating that knowledge. Coco, the famous gorilla who learned sign language, once blamed her kitten for breaking a sink that Coco herself had broken. Kanzi, the bonobo, who uses lexigrams to communicate, has been caught deliberately giving misleading information to keepers to get extra treats. So lying isn't uniquely human. But the scale of human lying? That's completely unprecedented in nature. We lie about the past. We lie about the present. We lie about the future. We lie about tangible things and abstract concepts. We build entire systems, religion, politics, marketing, that are fundamentally about managing and manipulating information, truth, and belief. And sometimes, those lies don't just hurt individuals. They destroy civilizations. Let's talk about the greatest disasters in history caused by lies. We already mentioned Iraq, but that's recent. Let's go back further. Chernobyl, Soviet Union. At 1:23 a.m. on April 26th, reactor number 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant explodes. It's the worst nuclear disaster in human history. The explosion releases 400 times more radiation than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. But here's the thing. The explosion wasn't the disaster. The lies were the disaster. Soviet officials knew within hours how catastrophic the situation was, but they didn't tell anyone. Not the nearby town of Pripyat, not the firefighters sent in without protective gear, not the international community. They claimed it was a small fire, under control, nothing to worry about. For 3 days, life continued normally in Pripyat. Children played outside. People went to work. A wedding was celebrated, all while being bombarded with lethal radiation. When Sweden detected massive radiation spikes and demanded an explanation, Soviet officials finally admitted something had happened, but continued to downplay the severity. They lied about casualty numbers. They lied about evacuation zones. They lied about the causes. The result? Conservative estimates put the death toll at 4,000. Other estimates go as high as 90,000 when you include long-term cancer deaths. An entire city was abandoned. An exclusion zone of 1,000 square miles remains uninhabitable today. All because officials prioritized the Soviet Union's reputation over human lives. They lied, and thousands died. Or consider the Holodomor, the Soviet famine of 1932-1933. Joseph Stalin's government seized grain from Ukrainian farmers to fund industrialization and suppress Ukrainian nationalism. Somewhere between 3.5 and 5 million people starved to death. But here's the lie. Stalin's government denied it was happening. While millions died, Soviet officials proclaimed record harvests. Foreign journalists who tried to report the truth were banned or expelled. The few photos that escaped were dismissed as propaganda. Walter Duranty, a New York Times correspondent in Moscow, actively covered up the genocide, writing articles denying the famine's existence while privately acknowledging it was real. Why? Because he wanted to maintain access to Stalin's government. For decades, the Soviet Union maintained the lie that no famine had occurred. It wasn't until the 1980s, after the USSR collapsed, that the truth became undeniable. By then, an entire generation of Ukrainians had been erased from history. A lie of that magnitude doesn't just kill people in the present. It murders memory itself. Or let's talk about Theranos. Elizabeth Holmes founded a company claiming to revolutionize blood testing. Hundreds of tests from a single drop of blood. Investors poured in $700 million. Walgreens partnered with them. Holmes appeared on magazine covers as the next Steve Jobs. There was one problem. The technology didn't work. It never worked. Not even close. But Holmes lied. To investors, to business partners, to patients whose lives depended on accurate test results. She faked demonstrations. She used traditional blood testing machines while claiming to use her own technology. She threatened and sued anyone who questioned her. When investigative journalist John Kerry Rue exposed the fraud in 2015, the company collapsed. Holmes was convicted of fraud in 2022. But the damage was done. Patients received false diagnoses, potentially missing real health problems. What's fascinating about Theranos isn't just that Holmes lied. It's that she apparently convinced herself her lies were true. People who worked with her say she genuinely believed that if she could just buy enough time, the technology would eventually work. She was lying to the world and to herself simultaneously. This is the dangerous intersection of ambition and self-deception. When you want something badly enough, your brain will let you believe almost anything. But those are modern examples. Let's go way back. The Black Death arrives in Europe. Between 1347 and 1353, the plague killed somewhere between 75 and 200 million people, up to 60% of Europe's population. It's one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, and the response was built on lies. Medical authorities of the time blamed bad air or divine punishment for sin. They prescribed bloodletting, which made things worse. They told people to avoid bathing because they believed water opened pores and let disease in, the exact opposite of helpful advice. But they couldn't admit they didn't know what was happening. Doctors were supposed to have answers. Religious authorities were supposed to understand God's will. Admitting uncertainty would have undermined their authority. So they lied. They prescribed useless treatments with confidence. They invented explanations that sounded plausible. They blamed Jews for poisoning wells, leading to pogroms and massacres. The tragedy isn't that they didn't know the truth. Germ theory wouldn't be discovered for another 500 years. The tragedy is that they couldn't admit they didn't know. If medieval authorities had said, "We don't understand this disease, we're trying our best, here's what we've observed," maybe fewer people would have died from fake treatments and religious persecution. But admitting ignorance felt like a bigger threat than lying with confidence. So what do all these disasters have in common? They're not just individual lies, they're systemic lies. Lies that become embedded in institutions, governments, companies. Lies that persist because they're useful to power structures. Sociologist Charles Bosk studied how organizations handle mistakes, and he identified a crucial pattern. Institutions that punish honesty create cultures of deception. If you know that admitting error will end your career, you'll cover up your mistakes. If you know that bad news kills the messenger, you'll stop delivering bad news. This is how NASA lost the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1986. Engineers at Morton Thiokol knew the O-rings would fail in cold weather. They told their managers. But managers were under pressure to maintain the launch schedule. They overruled the engineers. 7 astronauts died. Later investigation revealed that NASA had a culture where dissenting opinions were unwelcome, where schedule pressure overrode safety concerns, where the truth took a back seat to organizational priorities. This is how Wells Fargo employees opened millions of fake bank accounts in the 2010s. They were given impossible sales quotas. They knew they'd be fired if they failed. So they cheated, and management either didn't know or didn't want to know. This is how the Catholic Church covered up decades of child sexual abuse. Individual priests committed horrible crimes. But the institutional response, moving predators to new parishes, silencing victims, prioritizing the church's reputation, turned individual lies into systemic betrayal. When lying becomes organizational policy, the damage scales exponentially. But let's zoom back out. Because I started this by saying we all lie, and I meant it. You might be thinking, sure, but I don't lie about nuclear disasters or commit fraud. I'm just a regular person. And you're right, but you still lie. All the time. Research by DePaulo found that people lie in approximately 25% of social interactions. That means 1 out of every 4 conversations involves deception. Some of these are pro-social, some are self-serving, but they add up. You tell your partner you're fine when you're not. You tell your kids that vegetables will make them strong. You tell yourself you'll exercise tomorrow. You tell your coworker you're too busy to help when you're really just watching YouTube. None of these feel like real lies. They feel like social necessities, like self-preservation, like the normal cost of navigating a complex world. And they are. But they're still lies. So is there such a thing as a useful lie? Philosophically, this question has divided thinkers for millennia. Kant said no, lying always violates human dignity and rationality. The truth is a categorical imperative, no exceptions. Utilitarians like John Stuart Mill said maybe, if a lie produces more happiness than harm, it might be justified. Lying to the Nazis about hiding Jews in your attic? Obviously justified. But most modern ethicists fall somewhere in between. They recognize that absolute honesty can cause genuine harm, but they're skeptical of giving people carte blanche to lie whenever it seems convenient.
Psychologist Cicela Bock proposed a test of publicity. Would you be comfortable if everyone knew you'd told this lie? If yes, it might be justified. If no, you're probably rationalizing. The ugly truth is that lying works, in the short term anyway. Research shows that liars in negotiations often get better deals. Job candidates who exaggerate their qualifications get more interviews. Politicians who make bold, false promises often get elected.
The problem is the long term. Trust is fragile and takes years to build, but seconds to destroy. And once you've established yourself as unreliable, every truth you tell afterward is suspect. This is the paradox of lying. It's evolutionarily advantageous, but socially destructive. It benefits the individual, but corrodes the collective. We're trapped in a prisoner's dilemma where everyone would be better off if no one lied. But each individual has an incentive to defect. So can we stop? Probably not entirely. Lying seems to be baked into human cognition at a fundamental level. As long as we have theory of mind, the ability to understand what others are thinking, we have the ability to manipulate that thinking. But we can get better. Research shows that simple interventions can reduce dishonesty. Having people sign an honesty pledge before filling out forms reduces fraud. Reminding people of their moral values before tempting situations decreases cheating. Creating environments where honesty is rewarded and mistakes are treated as learning opportunities rather than firing offenses reduces institutional lying. The key is making honesty easier and lying harder, or at least making the costs of lying clearer. But there's something else we can do, something that might be more important. We can get honest about our dishonesty. We can stop pretending we're perfectly truthful people in a world of liars. We can acknowledge that we all bend the truth, shade our stories, present curated versions of reality. We can recognize that the line between tactful and dishonest is blurrier than we'd like. Because here's what I think the real danger is. Not that we lie, but that we lie to ourselves about lying. When we convince ourselves that our lies don't count, that our deceptions are justified, that we're fundamentally different from real liars, that's when we're most vulnerable to becoming the people in the historical disasters we just discussed. The person who lied about WMDs probably told themselves they were protecting national security. The officials who covered up Chernobyl probably told themselves they were preventing panic. Elizabeth Holmes probably told herself she was changing the world. They all believed their own lies, and that's the most dangerous lie of all. So here's what I want you to take away from this. Yes, we all lie. It's part of being human. Our brains evolved to deceive and detect deception in an endless arms race that's been going on for millions of years. Yes, some lies are probably necessary for society to function. Radical honesty sounds noble but would likely create chaos. But also, every lie has a cost, even the small ones. They add up. They shape who we are. They create the world we live in. The biggest lies in history didn't start as evil schemes. They started as small deceptions, rationalized and justified, that grew and metastasized until they consumed everything around them. So maybe the question isn't, should we stop lying? Because that's probably impossible. Maybe the better question is, can we be honest about when we're lying and why? Can we acknowledge our lies instead of burying them in rationalization? Can we create systems and cultures that tolerate truth-telling, even when it's uncomfortable? Can we stop treating honesty as a binary where you're either a perfect truth-teller or a complete liar? Because the alternative, a world where everyone lies and everyone pretends they don't, is the world we're already living in. And frankly, it's exhausting. Next time you're about to tell a lie, and you will, probably today, just notice it. Don't beat yourself up. Don't rationalize it away. Just see it for what it is. Because the first step to being more honest with others is being more honest with yourself. And if you can't be honest about lying, what can you be honest about? Subscribe if you want more deep dives into the uncomfortable truths about human nature, like if this made you squirm a little. Comment with the last lie you told. I promise I won't judge, because statistically, I've told 3 lies just in the time it took to write this script. Stay curious, stay skeptical, and maybe, just maybe, stay a little more honest.